What if I told you there was a better way to build vans, buses, ambulances, whatever? What if there was a build system that was half the weight, half the price, 3 times the insulation value, but still as strong and looking as good as conventional build methods? Well, there is, and that's what we're here to talk about today. The complete foam bones building system that I've developed over the last 4 or 5 years. What we have here now, I think, is something that might change the way that van builds and these kinds of overland vehicle builds are done. You can be the judge of that. But yeah, we're going to cover the entire foam bones building system. Number 1 of at least 3 videos here today. Let's get into it. Now, before we get too deep into it, here's your table of contents. You know, I understand you might not have all the time in the world to watch this video. I know it's long, but you could just pick the spots or the things that you want to hear about and go straight to them. Or maybe this is your second time through and you just need to be reminded about something that I covered. So, some of the footage in this video is going to be from previous videos, and you should still go watch those. They're still true and accurate. Link in the description. See the foam playlist. Maybe it's up here somewhere. The point is that I've borrowed the footage from those other videos because I'm too lazy to reshoot it, and it's still appropriate footage. So I'm going to include that footage here, and we're going to overdub it because over the last 4 or 5 years of working on the foam building system, as the dude would say, some new shit has come to light.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm blathering about. New shit has come to light. And shit, man.
So, anyway, in the next 3 videos, we're going to cover the entire foam bones building system from planning all the way through to skinning and finishing these to look like you see them here. So, probably going to want to subscribe if that interests you. Hit the bell so you don't miss the other videos that will follow this one. Then, after that, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 videos to come with all of the other elements of this build. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Today we're here to focus on just the foam bones build system. So, the first thing that we need to cover is that this is not a unique idea. People always comment, hey, foamy trailers have been doing this for years. Yes, they have. This is 2-inch XPS foam, and they're, piling it together on a trailer and gluing it together with the same techniques for the most part. Also, this is used in other build situations as well. Here's some pre-built foam panels that have 1/8-inch-ish ply on the outside, but yeah, they're $237 a piece, so maybe you don't want to do that. RVs have been using foam core panels of different foam and different exterior skins for a long time. So, I didn't invent this idea. I feel like what I have done though is I have perfected it. These foam panels, they actually use the XPS, the same stuff that we're using here. Okay, so this is not my brand new invention. This is just a way for people to do it themselves in their own DIY builds. This illustration here, the foam in the middle, adhesive in blue, and then the gray is the skin material. Same idea we're using here. Foam in the middle, screen on one side, wood on the other side. Depending on the situation, we're going to use different materials to do different solutions in this build. Like down here in this drawer, we don't need the wood skin. You never see that in there. Well, I mean, you can see it right now, but that's one of the first advantages of using foam. You don't have to always use the wood. Wood is more expensive. Don't use it where you don't have to.
Okay, so that's the basic concept. Now let's talk about materials. So primarily what we're dealing with here is XPS foam. It's made by Owens Corning, popularly in the United States, available at Home Depot and Lowe's, etc., etc. But XPS foam is available just about everywhere. What we need to talk about next, though, is how we're going to cut this foam. So when it comes to cutting the foam, there's lots of different ways that you could do it, but the best way to do it is with a hot knife. There's two different versions of this hot knife. This one is just the wire version, which is very thin. It's a little bit slow because it doesn't get as hot. It's what they call the crafter's knife from Hot Wire Foam Factory. And this can do really tight curves and things like that. But like I said, it's slow. There's the other version, which is the Pro knife from Hot Wire Foam Factory, and that one's got these two metal bands that are going to allow you to cut much faster, but primarily just straight cuts. I mean, you can get some pretty wide curves in there, but yeah, it's really good at doing these longer, straighter cuts. So yes, you can cut it with a box knife. Yes, you can cut it with a jigsaw. Yes, you can cut it with just about anything, a hacksaw, etc. But the hot knife is the way to go. Pick yourself up one if you're serious about doing this build method. When it comes to joinery, what I saw happening when I first started this build system were people just butting two ends together, putting a bleed of glue, sticking to the two ends together, and letting the glue dry. And that will work, it will, but it's not as strong as if you cut these notches out. These are called finger joints, and look, these are already holding themselves together. The benefit here is that not only am I getting more surface area to glue onto, but these hold themselves together without any glue, so I can do mock-ups, right? So if I was trying to get an 8-inch piece here, if I was making an 8-inch joint, if I did it like this, right, just butting them together, I would only get 8 inches of glue and I would only get it on one plane. If I do it this way with these finger joints in here, I actually get 10 inches of gluable surface. That's because I get it on 3 different planes, this plane, and then these 2 planes, and I get an extra 2 inches of glue out of the deal. So this method of putting these things together, notching them out like this, whether we're plunging through or whether we're just doing them like this, is how we're going to do all of our joints whenever possible. Now, when you look at how this comes together, I've got some plunge cuts here that are going in mortise and tenon style. I have some finger joints around the edges. I'm gluing it up. We'll talk about the glue up thing later. But as you're doing this, these are going to hold themselves together. Here's all of the pieces in my initial mock-up taken out of the van and then assembled in the driveway, including the floor all the way up to the bed platform, the sink supports that we just put there, all of these different things, no glue, just holding themselves together. This notched system of holding these things together has lots of different benefits. Okay, strengthening the foam. So look, foam is pretty strong, but it does want to bend. So here's how we come over that. We put a little Glidden gripper or heavy duty primer paint down, we lay some window screen on that, and then we put some more Glidden gripper paint over that. We do that on both sides, and we end up strengthening that particular piece. So look, foam has this compression strength. It doesn't want to get smashed, but it will bend. It's fairly easy to break. So without any on it, 10 pounds, no way that piece is holding it. That piece that we just screened, you put 10 pounds on that, and it flexes. It flexes, but it doesn't break, right? So that's the methodology that we're going to use to strengthen that foam. If we want to add additional strength to it, we can put other skins on it, like 1/8 inch finished grade plywood, for example, but we don't have to do that. Anywhere that we don't need a finished look, we're just going to leave it with the screen material on both sides. We're going to do this screening system after we've cut all the pieces out, after we've assembled them and glued them together. This is going to provide additional strength in bringing all of our pieces together. So after we've got it all built, then we're going to go in and insert the screen wherever we need it.
So here's some more new shit that has come to light.
New shit has come to light.
The important factor in this build that I never took into consideration was that the foam will flex. Remember, we put the unscreened foam, it wouldn't hold 10 pounds. We put the screened foam on there and it flexed 1 inch, right? That flexibility is actually one of the most amazing attributes of this. We need that flexibility. The same way that like a suspension bridge will flex in the wind or in an earthquake, or the same way a skyscraper will sway in an earthquake or in the wind, right? That flexibility is going to help us when we're driving down the road in this earthquake that we're always putting this thing through, right? It's going to flex and not break. That's an essential element, and that's our next attribute of foam over building with wood. It flexes, but it won't break. Next. Okay, so I shot the weight comparison on the Q&A video. See the link in the description. And I kind of glazed over some things. Nobody called me out on it. Maybe that's because I roast the haters, but I need to get some more specific measurements. We had all these measurements and those were accurate, but that was just for one cabinet. And now we've got a whole build system. So what I need to do is I need to take those measurements and I need to, still using just 1 square foot, and I needed to distribute them across all of the different ways that I used the build. So here's what we've got going on. And now we're using 1 square foot of material here, okay, 1 square foot. And we're going to distribute the weight across that 1 square foot. We're using weight in ounces here, and the percentage of build is how many elements, what percentage of the whole build did I use that particular material on, right? And then we're going to be comparing that between the foam and versus 1/2 inch plywood. So 1 inch XPS foam only, 3.3 ounces, right? I only use that on about 5% of the build. It's back in the laundry room and the dresser drawers back there. And then we have the screen and paint per side, 0.9 ounces. We didn't use that anywhere on the build. Then we have the foam with screen one side only. So that's 4.2. That's the foam weight plus the screen plus the Glidden gripper paint, right? Then we have foam on 2 sides, both sides screened, right? It's 5.1 ounces. Let's see, we've got just the 1/8 inch birch plywood by itself, 7.95 ounces. I didn't use only birch on any of the build, but I did put that birch on some foam. So foam with 1/8 inch birch one side, screen only on the other side, 12.15 ounces. Use that on 25% of the build. So my 1 square foot ends up with 3 ounces of that. That's how this spreadsheet is working, right? Foam with 1/8 inch on both sides, that's 19.2 ounces. Use that on 20% of the build. That's 13.84 ounces added to my conglomerate square foot. Foam plus screen on 2 sides, plus 1/8 inch on 2 sides, 21 ounces. That's the heavy dog. You don't use that very much. Then we've got the 1/2 inch or 5mm birch plywood only. That's coming in at 30.25 ounces, right? So what all of this ends up meaning is that the way that I built it with this mix of foam and wood, even though I use the 1/2 inch ply in some places, ends up being about a third, 0.38, about a third the weight as if you used all 1/2 inch plywood. All right, next, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go find out how much this stuff costs online and throw that onto some spreadsheets. I know, have a beer if you get stressed out by math, because that's how I do it. All right, when we go and we look at the Foamular, the XPS foam, 4x8 sheets, 4 times 8, you got it, okay? It's 20 bucks. We do the division. That'll be on the spreadsheet in a minute. So then we have the screen, right? So the screen comes in 48 inches, 4 feet, by 100 feet long, about $65, $66, right? Glidden gripper, the paint, the primer that we use, probably could buy it cheaper, $23 and something cents, let's call it $24. And then how much are we using of that, right? How much is the coverage? So we got to go look up the coverage. We get the coverage numbers here. Let's see, at 1 mil, 740 squeet, you know, maybe a little bit less than that for practical coverage. We'll see. Then next, we've got the 1/8 inch. That's coming in at 15, 16. Let's just call it 16. Then we've got the 1/2 inch, 68 something. Now we're gonna have to put an asterisk on these last 2 pieces of wood, because when I was buying these, they were much more expensive. As an economic thing, as inflation or COVID, something. But the point is, way more expensive. So my half number, half the price, we're gonna put an asterisk on that it's about 68%, but here's the math that gets us there. Talking about the 1-inch XPS foam, right? Still, same percentages here, 5% used. The cost per square foot, when you get your abacus out and you do the math, it's about 63 cents per square foot. So the extended cost of that, if we're taking 1 square foot and we're only 5% of it is the cost of that foam by itself, 3 cents, lousy 3 pennies, right? Screen per side, paint per side, screen and paint per side. We don't use those. We didn't use those in the build, so they're not in the extended cost, but we use those numbers to add up all of this other stuff. So screen with on one side, nothing on the other side, about 10% of the build. 90 cents is the cost of that. Divide that out by 10%, 9 cents. Foam on 2 sides, both of those sides being screened. 30% of the build was done with that, so we take $1.17, which is the cost of that per square foot, divide it by 30%, multiply it by 30%, however you want to think of it, about 35 cents. Now, I'm rounding, okay? I'm rounding the numbers, so just so there's 2 decimal points. Don't worry about it. 1/8-inch birch plywood, we didn't use that by itself, but it costs 50 cents a square foot. Then we got the foam with the 1/8-inch one side and screen only on the other side. About 25% of the build was with that. $1.40 per square foot for that, divided out by 25%. 35 cents for that. And then we got the foam 1/8 on both sides. 20% of my build looks like that because I have those facing edges, right? Facing on this side, facing on that side. I want it to look nice. So that is going to be about 33 cents because I've got 20% of my build being done that way. Foam plus the screen 2 times and the big dog with the 1/8-inch on both sides and the screen, 5% ends up being about 11 cents. 1/2-inch birch plywood, only use that on about 5% of my build. Now, we need to talk about that for a second. The drawer fronts, the countertops, these cabinet doors, I'm not counting that because we're only talking about the structural aspect of it. Look, do not make cabinet drawers or cabinet doors or drawer faces with foam. It's getting too much wear and tear. The foam is for the structure and the 1/8-inch is just for the look, okay? That's how we're using it, all right? So let's get back over here. So the Nomad's foam and wood combo ends up coming in when you take 100% of the elements to that 1 square foot. The averages out, or the conglomerate cost is $1.36 per square foot, compared to the 1/2-inch, which is, you know, it's heavier. We've already established that, but that comes in, if you use that for all the same elements, to about $2.09. Now, that's 65%. I know that 65% is not half. We talked about that earlier. The wood was more expensive, 1/8-inch and 1/2-inch, but especially the 1/2-inch. Previously, in the 21, 22, when I was doing the build, than it is now. But I'm trying to give you today's prices. So, next. Now, another thing that gets left out of the conversation, I mean, I even left it out of my own video originally, is the insulation value here. Every single inch of this foam that I put in this vehicle is R5. It's an R5 insulation value. So when I'm building with it, every layer of this that I have before we get to the living area, or before we get to the bedroom, or before we get to the cooler or the refrigerator or whatever, every layer of that is R5. Now, compare that R5 to what 1/2-inch plywood has, 0.63 R value for that. You're not getting much insulation out of the conglomerate. So one last time, we're going to go back into the spreadsheets. We're going to work this out. We're going to find out how much more insulation value we get when we use the foam bones building system. So what we end up with when we get the spreadsheet together, I swear it's the last one, we're almost done, is that the R value of this Nomad's, wood and foam mix build system, that's going to be about 4.93. I've pretty much retained all of the insulation value of that R5 foam for the most part. Plywood only, 0.63 like we said. So yeah, it's 3 times. It's a lot. That translates into keeping this milder. It stays the same temperature regardless of what's going on outside. You want that. You need that. You don't want to be running fans. You don't want to be running your AC. You don't want to be running your heater as much as possible. You don't want to be having your refrigerator or your cooler or whatever run. Keep the insulation is paramount when driving over the country. Okay? Next. So there is one aspect of the building system that is, not as good or easy as working with wood. And that's going to be the labor element. And this is a little nuanced, so we're going to have to talk about it. But basically what we end up with is about 20% more work that we have to do when we use the foam building system than when we use just half-inch plywood. And I'll spare you the spreadsheet on this one because it can't really be, laid out that way. But when you go and you're cutting the foam, and then you're cutting the screen, and then you're laminating the screen, we're cutting all of those finger joints out of the foam, that makes for more labor. And then add to that anywhere that you want the presentation material, that's going to be another set of cutting out that you need to do, right? Measure that piece again, cut it out, and then adhere it to the foam. So it is more labor, about 20%, I would say, because we're not doing the second piece of wood on all of the pieces, and the foam is really easy to work with. I can just hold it on my lap and cut it into the shape that I want, or I don't have to go and move out and get a saw. I don't have to sand it down the edges. I don't have to, I'm not working with screws. We'll talk about screwing things into the foam in the next video. But for the most part, it ends up being about 20% more. I did this whole cabinet as an experiment. We'll talk about this in a future video, only out of the half-inch wood. And building that out of the wood versus building it strictly out of foam ended up being about 20% longer that it took me to build it out of foam. So downside, a little bit more labor in this building system, but you get all of the other upsides that we talked about: the cheaper, the more insulation, the lighter, all the other ones that we still haven't discussed yet. So that is one downside. It takes a little bit more time to do it this way, but I think you end up with a superior product. Like I said, you can be the judge. Next. Okay, now that you understand the overview of how the build system comes together and some of the main advantages of the foam building system, now it's time to plan out the build. And the first thing we need to talk about is where not to use foam. And this basically breaks down into like three main categories. Category number one, where you have a lot of things that you're going to need to screw into, say, a wall. For example, where all of my electrical stuff is. The inverter is heavy. All of those wire clamps that are holding the wires in their organized state, those are a bunch of screws that need to go into that, right? So there, I just used a half-inch piece of plywood. I happen to have covered mine with some stainless steel for fireproofing, but that's neither here nor there. Then another example is over on the water side, the plumbing side of my vehicle. The pump, the expansion tank, the hosing, the hoses for hot and cold and supply and all of that, venting and all of that kind of stuff. On that side, I actually used a 1/4-inch particle board with like a plastic melanin exterior coating on it for waterproofness, right? So in those two situations where you're screwing a bunch of things in, decide in your design where you want to use the wood and where you want to use the foam, right? Use the wood because we'll talk about this later, but to screw into the foam, you have to use drywall anchors, and it's laborious to put those in, so you might as well just use some wood when you have a bunch of places that you need to put screws into. Now, the second category of when not to use foam is going to be situations where you either can't afford something that is an inch thick, or you have a situation where the design is going to interrupt the structural integrity of the piece of foam. In other words, back in my cooler, I have an area where I have a hole cut out so that I can reach through and work on my electrical system. That hole is in a pretty big piece, so I'm not worried about this window that's about this big in a huge piece of foam. But under here, where I have this flip out for my shoes, and a little cabinet door above it, That particular situation kind of had all of those things going on. It was interrupting the structural integrity of it. I didn't want to use a full inch wide, and I had a situation where I was going to be putting a lot of screws into it for the hardware, for that kind of stuff. So that's the second situation where you don't want to use foam. Now, the third place that you don't want to use foam, we kind of already talked about. It's on your like cabinet doors or your drawer fronts. Anywhere that's going to be seeing regular wear and tear, right? Situations where you have a lot of movement of those things, or they're facing out and being banged into. Any of those situations you don't want to use the foam for, because, well, first of all, I mean, an inch thick door here would be, you know, kind of a pain in the neck. But those aren't good places to use the foam. Mostly where we want to use the foam is that structural integrity that's hidden behind the scenes, just to keep the thing light, use less money, and build that insulation into all of these different things that we're going. All right. Next, let's talk about planning. So the first step for planning is, for me, is just these scale drawings. And I'll do a bunch of them, but once I get one that I'm pretty satisfied with, the next thing that I do is I go and I colorize that. Pink for the foam elements, and then yellow or orange for my wood elements. Now, I'm not talking about the skins or anything like that. I'm only saying, look, this whole piece, this whole cabinet here is going to be pink because it's going to be foam. Yes, it's going to have wood on the drawer fronts or wood on the countertop or a wood skin on the outside of this. But when I drew this wall, it was indicated as pink in my drawing, okay? And that way I know approximately how much foam I need to buy versus how much half-inch plywood I need to buy, right? Then I move on to the aspect of creating like a three-dimensional drawing. These allow me to kind of see from the perspective, in this case, the perspective of looking at it from the front seats, looking back this way at that build, so that I can think about the way that I'm going to live in the space. Now, this part, not very important for the foam bones building system that we're talking about, but I just want to point that out. In fact, if you guys are interested in more of this kind of scale drawings or perspective drawings, or this next piece, which is like a 3D model, if you're interested in that, drop a comment down in the comments section and let me know that you'd like to see an episode on that. I have the footage for it. I could do a whole episode on how I did those particular elements. The third one that we're looking at here is this three-dimensional, scaled model. And I happened to find my wife had like some old Star Wars toys from when she was a kid, and they were great because they articulated at all of their waist and their knees and everything. So I could sit them in seats, I could stand them at the counter, but I scaled a cardboard version of my van to those actual, figurines. So we got Luke and the Stormtrooper here interacting in the van together. That helps me realize, can I sit up in the bed and not hit my head? Can two people stand next to each other in the sink area with this counter pulled out? All different kinds of things like that. It just helps me visualize before I actually start cutting anything out. Okay, so that's your early scale drawing and prototype planning section. Next up is mocking up the build. Now, what does that even mean? What am I talking about? When I talk about mocking up with the foam bones building system, what I'm talking about is that I can put all of these elements together and not glue them together, not invest any more labor other than cutting out the foam, and using that finger joint system, it's going to hold itself together, not for any impact, but just for me to live in the space, to work in the space. The way my brain works with this kind of stuff is that even though I've done the scale drawings and the three-dimensional drawings and the actual model, I still want to live in here and understand how I am going to interact in the space and things like that. So what we're able to do is just start putting these pieces together and see how they're fitting together and see how they're working. And because we only have that foam invested in the build, we can very easily change our mind about something. How wide is this counter? How deep is it? What angle is this cabinet on? Any of those different aspects we can change for very little cost to us. In fact, even if I took one of the main pieces for the cabinet, right, and was like, you're the wrong shape, you got to get out of here, I can still cut some other foam piece out of that element. Those are very large whole pieces of foam. So I do those first so that if I have to scrap them, then I can build some smaller element out of them later. And that's just a principle that you should be using whether you're building with wood or with foam. Make your biggest cuts first, and then your smaller cuts can fit around those pieces of scrap once you've created those bigger cuts. So that's why we're doing the mock-up. Let's talk about how we're going to do the mock-up. The how part is pretty straightforward. You just start cutting out pieces of foam according to the plan that you had on your drawing, and then adding those notches in. So looking at the back garage area, first I just laid the pieces of foam in there and then just kind of, had them house of cards style, just sitting on top of each other, no notches, anything like that. Then I notched the floor out and the upright parts of that so that I could put those pieces into the floor. Then I laid my bed platform on top of it and made sure that that was looking the way that I wanted, and then I notched out where those are going to be, trying to keep everything level and square and plumb and everything like that. Look, there's not a single level, square, plumb thing in the interior of a van. You have to work very hard to figure out where your level is going to be. But then once you get that and you can start mocking it up, you can get all of those elements pieced together, and you can make design changes as you go. And that's an important element of working with foam. The ability to easily go in there and just rip out something from that mock-out stage and put a new piece in. Of course, you can do this with wood. It's harder to cut out pieces of wood than it is to cut out pieces of foam. So it gives you the opportunity to kind of do a rough design build of this. And here's a very specific situation where I made a design change on the fly. So we're back here in the garage area, and I had a layout for how my cooler was going to fit in there, and I thought what I was going to do is have like a half wall or a 3/4 wall come up on the right side of the cooler between it and the electrical area, and then so I could have like a wider area above it where I could slide some big chairs into or something along those lines. And I scrapped that idea. I decided I wanted to go with a full wall all the way up. Partially I did that for the structural stability of the weight that was going to be in the bed when we were sleeping or sitting back there. But partially I did that because the way that I wanted to rearrange all of these elements in my garage area. So what I did was I just took that piece out and built another one and inserted it into the same tabs that the same holes that I had already made in that bed platform and in the floor, right? I also ran this piece very long. It goes deep towards the chairs into the kitchen area of the van. And the reason that I left it that way was that I knew at whatever point I was going to have my 1/2-inch wood for all the drawer faces that I have in this area, wherever that was, I could just lop it off. But for now, in my mock-up, it's sitting there as a structural element that I can use to kind of feel how the space feels before building it out all the way. Yeah? Okay, next. So we're gonna have to talk real quick about a question that I get all the time in my previous videos. Links in the description. The question is, hey, wouldn't it be easier just to take the foam as a 4x8 sheet, screen the whole thing, and then put your 1/8-inch laminate over the top of that? Maybe that would be easier. And that is the way that they sell these foam panels that are, 200 and whatever it is, ridiculous dollars a piece. But I don't do it that way, and I don't do it that way for several reasons. So let's talk about them now. The first reason is that we want to be able to do this whole mock-up thing and toss pieces of foam if we don't need them, right? And if we had already laminated the screen onto there and put some sort of 1/8 inch plywood on top of that, then we'd be throwing away a lot of our materials. It's also harder to cut at that point. So when we're doing our mock-ups, we're doing our primary structure first, and then we're going in and we're like inserting shelves or other elements intersecting into it. That's part of the great thing about doing the mock-up, is that we can do it that way. And if I had to cut through the foam and the wood and the screen, my hot knife is not gonna, I'm going to lose some of that efficiency. So it's primarily for, the first one is primarily for the materials efficiency and the ease of use and speed of labor. We don't want to have the skin coatings on there already. The second reason is that we don't know where we're going to need foam only, foam with screen, foam with 1/8 inch, foam with screen and 1/8 inch, foam with like down here with just a wood veneer on it. So when we are building with the foam, we don't know which of those elements we need. In some areas, you can get away with just the foam by itself because it's not enough of a structural element to need any screen or any wood on top of it, and it's not ever seen, so you don't need it there, right? It's just an insulative layer that you're putting in. Then sometimes you can just have screen on both sides, but you don't know the size, shape, or whatever of that screen. So the third reason is, like we said in the beginning of this video when we were talking about the overview of doing the screening, we want to do the screening after we've glued all the foam pieces together. And the reason that we want to do it that way is that we can run that screening along those joints in the corners, anywhere that two pieces of foam butt together like this. Anywhere that we have a joint, we're going to glue that joint, and then we're going to run screen around that joint so that it's also, that screen is adding to that structural integrity of holding that piece, that joint together, okay? So that's why I wouldn't buy those foam panels that we saw at the beginning of the video, and it's also why I wouldn't go through and like screen and laminate wood onto all of those pieces. Next, the next thing we're dealing with is bending foam. Look, this came from the Q&A session that I did after my first video. One of the viewers asked, can you bend it? How far can you bend it before it breaks? And what I realized is that you can cut these recessions into the backside of the foam, and then it will bend. And so then you can create elements like this, where you have a curved architectural feature that you're not going to stub your knee or your toe or whatever. It also makes for a more interesting, transition between these areas, and it's curved because this is a high traffic area. All you have to do to be able to create these foam curved elements is cut those recessions, then hold it into place in your mock-up, and then glue where you cut those different recessions. Tape it up a little bit so it holds itself together, let that glue dry, and it will hold that shape. Then you have to use a flexible skin material on it. That's where that wood veneer comes in really great, because you can put that veneer on there and it's thin enough. It's like 1/16, 32nd of an inch, maybe even less than that. It's going to be able to bend with the foam, right? By the way, wood veneer, I use mostly 1/8 inch laminate on these surfaces. So it's foam with just 1/8 inch over it, right? I wish I would have done more wood veneer, because where I don't need any extra structural strength, I could have done the screen, the foam, then the screen, then the veneer like I have on this curved piece down here, okay? The veneer is relatively cheap, and it's much lighter, and it's much easier to work with. You can cut it out with scissors, basically, or a box knife, no problem. That is one enhancement that we could still do to the way that I did this. Next. All right, continuing on with our mock-up process here, what we've got going on is we're building these bulkhead walls, one on each side of the transition area from the bedroom into the living or kitchen area, right? So when I'm building these, I'm trying to adapt it to all of these funky shapes that are in the van, stock van walls, right? And I'm not worrying about fitting it, creating the notches for fitting it into the ceiling yet. I'm only worrying about the shape so that it fits up against the wall, right? And that's another advantage of foam here, because I'm able to just sit there, pull the piece away, cut it, push it up against it again. Does it fit? No, it doesn't. Okay, now I need to do some along the top. Now I need to do some here. Now I need to cut out this little piece for, I don't know, the vent or the wire harness or whatever the case may be. Being able to move back and forth and work with it, you know, the hot knife in your hand, you can't really do that when you're working with a piece of wood. You're going to have to take it, mark the piece of wood, lay it down on a workbench, cut it, put it back in here, back and forth and back and forth. And this kind of plays into why the labor issue is only really 20% gain when working, or 20% longer when working with foam, is that you don't have to, I don't have a workbench here to make all these cuts. I'm just going through and just doing it. A lot of times you can just hold it in place there and cut it, especially up against metal when you're dealing with, you know, the sides of your van and things like that. It's fine. It's not going to do anything to it. So you can just work with it like that. About the worst you're going to get is, you know, a little burn on your fingers. It's not that bad. Way better than, you know, missing a finger out of the deal. So that's one of the big advantages. Now, as I'm doing these bulkhead walls, notice that I haven't put any of the plunge cuts in them, the holes to fit those tabs in. I'm actually working with it a little bit in front of where I'm going to end up putting it, and then I'll go in and I'll cut those notches into the foam so that it fits, puzzle piece fits, those mortise and tenon joints fit and hold that piece in, right? Now the next thing I'm doing is I'm taking this and I'm duplicating it, right? I'm going to have another one on this side of the wall, right? There's actually a third one in front here, but this closet has another one of these bulkheads, right? So I have a piece that I'm just like the one that's over here, and it's going to follow pretty much the same pattern because it's fitting up against the just opposite side of the van. So I can just take that, trace it out. I have to make a different cutout at the bottom for the way that it's fitting around my water tank, but for the most part, it's going to fit in there almost immediately. And then I just have to do a few trims here and there to get that to be the exact size that I want, and then we're good to go. We have those two bulkhead pieces set up and ready to go. Now that we've got all these big major elements in here, now we're going to go through and we're going to put in some of these shelves or different elements like that. So let's move on to that next. Okay, secondary structure. So look, once we've got all the main pieces of our build in place and we can kind of live with them and kind of feel how they're working out, we're going to find situations where we're going to want secondary pieces of foam inserted into there. And we can just leave those primary pieces in place, and then we can cut into them right here. If this was just foam, I could cut into this and you know, insert a shelf right here. If I could open this, I'd show you, but you know, just put that shelf in there. Putting the tongue and groove or the mortise and tenons into here, putting tabs into my shelf piece, and manipulating the foam around to get that to fit in, right? We can put a bunch of smaller pieces into place while we're in our mock-up, and those are going to be our secondary elements of the build, right? Now we continue on like this through this mock-up process. We're working down here underneath this area, building a little two-part shelf for a big storage area that's going to be above my water tank, and there's a bunch of fine work in here. And then once we get all of those secondary elements in and we're happy with them, maybe we're not happy with them. Maybe we need to pull some of those out, move it down. No problem. Yes, we have those cutouts in here for where we wanted that to be, but that's fine. We can glue another piece of foam into there if we want, or honestly, probably just leave it. If it's going to have a skin on both sides, just leave the hole in there. It's not a big deal. so we can move all of those pieces around, get all of those secondary pieces done, and then at some point we get to the point where we feel like we're pretty solid on our mock-up stage, and we're ready to start screening everything that's going to have screen, or putting facing on any of the stuff that we have facing, right? Okay, so now we have our completed mock-up. Now, because we had to get some body work done on the van before I put the entire build into the van, long story, we'll talk about that in a future video. Because we had to do that, I took all the pieces out and then we just constructed them outside in the driveway, mostly just to show you all what it looked like, the whole idea that it could stand and hold itself together without any glue or anything like that. There are some situations where you could use that, like if you needed to add pieces and it was hard to reach from the inside the van, you could just construct it outside the van and then add those pieces in or adjust those pieces. But for the most part, you're just going to build your mock-up in here, and then you will eventually take it all apart and then go to glue it back together. So up next in volume 2, we're going to first start with the glue. And I did a bunch of research and development that I'm going to share with you guys about glue for holding this van together. And I made some interesting discoveries, and I've changed my glue type from my original videos. The second thing that I did a bunch of research and development on is the strength of pulling that away, the shear force when you glue two pieces together. How much pounds of pressure does it take to separate that particular joint? Then I also did some research and development on developing a way to screw into the foam for things like drawer slides or any kind of anchor or situation where you might need to screw something into the foam. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Basically, it's a special drywall anchor that we're adapting, and then we're gluing into the foam, letting that dry, and then we're going to be able to screw a screw into that. I did some pull-out tests of that, how much force it would take, how many pounds of force it would take to pull that out, and I got some mind-blowing results, and that's why I've been able to do the 200-pound drawer slides, put that huge cooler back there, screwing it into foam, and having no worries about those drawer slides coming out. So those research and development things with the glue up are going to be covered in the next video. We're also going to cover in the next video more details about the actual screening process and the skinning process. How do I do that? With what kinds of glue, etc., etc. Then, volume 3, we're going to get into some deeper details, including things like getting all of these elements to work together, and some mistakes that I made and some improvements that I still think are left to be made. So, like we said before, subscribe and click the bell if you want. I mean, like this video if you want. I don't really care, but I'm just saying, if you want to catch those, if you're thinking about doing this build system, you're going to want to subscribe, because YouTube's not really pushing my things out at the moment. The algorithm and I aren't very good friends right now. Speaking of which, if you are in any forums or other communities on any of the other social medias, and you wanted to share this video over there, I would appreciate it. I'm just trying to put out information that people would maybe find useful. So I'm not doing much self-promotion out there. But if you know of some people who might like to see this, or would have an opinion on it, please share it with them on whatever those forums or social media venues are. All right, well, that does it for the first of 3 episodes for this foam build. I know it took me a long time to get it out here, but hopefully it's been helpful. There's going to be 2 more at least following this one. Before I release that one, I think I'm going to do a quickie about this free-ish spot that we're at way down in South Texas near Big Bend. Maybe you guys will like those. You'll let me know in the comments. But yeah, I'm going to just show you a cool free site that we found. And then, yeah, I'll get the second one out as soon as possible after that, and then the third to follow. In the meantime, if I have released the second or third versions, the second one will be up here, and you can just go watch that. If you want to watch my original foam video, or maybe the Q&A, and then last, whatever my most recent video down here. You know, we'll see you next time.